Okay. You can hear me okay, yeah? Yep. Not too loud. No bleeding ears. Let's get stuck into this, ladies and gentlemen. The report has 9 chapters. 9 chapters covering a range of topics, starting with the current state of the industry. Brexit, that's been a lot of fun so far. The US election, that's been rather scary so far. Could even get scarier. We've got the emerging destinations, we've got aviation, as well as the impact of terrorism on the industry. So let's start with this. The report illustrates the optimism from the travel industry. WTM 2016, ladies and gentlemen, is poised to facilitate, that's a lot of money, $2.5 billion in business deals over the next 3 days, with 9,100 buyers having more than 865,500 meetings. It's a lot of meetings. And 5,000 exhibitors. The report shows that more than two-thirds of industry respondents say that travel and tourism is going to grow, which is great, going to grow in 2017, with the same percentage also expecting their company's business to expand next year. So if we break it down a little bit more, let's take a look at this. China is expected to be the main beneficiary in the increase of travel. Perhaps no surprises. This is going to be discussed more about China in the emerging destinations chapter in a little bit. But furthermore, countries that had a very difficult 2016 look like they may bounce back next year. Take a look at Greece. 37% of those who are polled are planning to have business discussions with Greek businesses. Turkey, 29%. Egypt, 17%. And of those, this is very important, of those, 80%, around 80%, 8 out of 10 respondents for all 3 countries are confident of agreeing deals with those countries. You see Tunisia there. We know Tunisia has been hit awfully hard, of course, as well. 8% of the sample looking to have business negotiations. And with Tunisia, 70%, 7 out of 10 of those are planning to agree deals. So that's good news. As I said, it's been a lot of fun lately, hasn't it? The impact of the UK's decision to leave the European Union on the global travel and tourism industry will certainly be one of the most hotly debated or discussed topics right here at the WTM this year. The report reveals that UK holiday makers, their worst fears, it's price rises. And those price rises may come very well true. 2/3 of British holiday makers have expressed concerns about Brexit, mostly due to the plunging value of the quid, the sterling. Although we've seen a little bit since that Thursday decision from the UK High Court. We saw a little bit of a rally, a fairly decent rally, certainly the best it's been in 3 weeks to a month. So a little bit of a rally in the sterling. But there is fear, a lot of fear of raised holiday prices and the cost in resort. 1/3 of holiday companies said they would increase their costs next year due to Brexit. For the inbound industry, fears of staffing, a staffing crisis, that looms, with more than 4 in 10 saying it's going to be difficult recruiting staff. This has been somewhat compounded, I guess, by when we heard not that long ago, Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, who was discussing these rather controversial plans for companies to list all foreign staff they employ, although I think there's been a little bit of a backpedal on that. Despite the UK being better value to overseas holiday makers, 4 in 10 industry professionals believe the referendum vote has had a negative impact on their organisations. With almost half, 47%, you can see it right there, saying it'll have a negative impact on their organisation. Emerging destinations. The World Travel Market Industry Report predicts the rise of the chic, I think that's how you say it, chic destinations. China, India, Iceland, and Cuba. These rather disparate destinations are the ones that WTM London participants are looking to speak to this year to increase their business in all 4 of those locations. So if we break that down a little bit more, 55% of travel firms expect to do more business with China. 49% expect to conduct more business with India, 40% with Cuba, and 37% with Iceland. Furthermore, I have to add this, 40% of UK holidaymakers are interested in visiting Iceland. I mean, beautiful country, lovely people. Stay away from the volcanoes, but wonderful place. But that we'll talk about this in the panel session, actually. So, what did I say? 40% of UK holidaymakers are interested in visiting Ireland. 24%, you can see there, Cuba. 21% of UK holidaymakers want to go to China. And 20% to India. China, we know, is increasing its capacity to the country, its flight capacity, while also making it easier for tourists to visit. India has spent some $300 million on its tourism infrastructure as it aims for 13 million visitors a year by 2020. Iceland's forecast to welcome 2 million tourists next year, and that is 5 times more than in 2010. While Cuba, well, you know the story of Cuba. Cuba is on the cusp, of course, of a tourism boom with those travel restrictions eased. Let's take a look at one of my favourite subjects, aviation. We know the UK government has backed the Davies Commission's proposal for that third runway at Heathrow. Been a long time coming. The move, of course, is still a long time to go. The move will go through this consultation period before any building work can start. This is interesting, though, because the travel industry seems split on this decision, with only 51% supporting the move. I find that very interesting. Just 11% said the government shouldn't back Heathrow, while 39% admitted that they weren't sure or they just didn't know. More than 8 out of 10, you can see it right there in the big blue circle, 82% expect to see an increase in South East England's aviation capacity in the next 10 years. Again, this is according, of course, to the poll. And opinion is also split over how soon it actually might happen. With 42% of the respondents, they're predicting that the South East will get a new runway in the next 5 years. 5 years, I'd say good luck to that. 40% say it's going to happen within the next 6 to 10 years. That's probably more realistic. Just 15% think it'll happen in the next 11 to 15 years, while just 1% don't think South East will get any increase in airport capacity. Supersonic. The report also predicts the return of supersonic jets to our skies. I'm rather excited about this. The WTM Global Trends Report, that's going to be released tomorrow morning right here in this room, is going to predict the rebirth of supersonic flying with a number of organizations working on this, including NASA, the Virgin Group, investing in supersonic jets. Furthermore, again, very interesting, almost two-thirds of the industry agrees that supersonic flying will become more mainstream than the Concorde. And we all know the Concorde, the London to New York route, and that was retired in 2003. Supersonic flying, say most of the people polled say that it could start as early as 2020. Supersonic flying as early as 2020. That we'll have to wait and see. Hey, staying with the subject somewhat of aviation, let's talk about the rise of air rage. It's been all over the UK media, of course, this year. We've seen a lot of it. More and more flights are impacted by antisocial behaviour. Let's break those numbers down. Do you know there is one air rage incident for every 1,205 flights? That's globally. With the UK, right here, the UK Civil Aviation Authority reporting a rise from 85 incidents in 2013 to 386 last year. This number is globally last year. That's a lot of onboard air rage. And it's funny because when I saw this photo, it's the same photo we used in one of my programs as a backdrop. I don't think the guy in the front's going to win, though. That's all I want to say. I don't think he's going to win. Excessive alcohol drinking is believed to be one of the key reasons behind the increase, of course, in air rage, with holidaymakers drinking at all hours of the day at the airport before flying and carrying on the party on board the plane. Jet2, I'm sure you've all heard about that, introduced that ban on selling alcohol before 8 a.m. flights. Jet2 has also dished out 50 lifetime bans to disruptive passengers. Do you know more than a quarter, you can see that figure there, 27% of UK holidaymakers polled say they've experienced air rage, with almost 3/4, some 73%, who actually they back and support Jet2's 8 a.m. alcohol ban. I just want to know what happens after 8 a.m. People don't stop drinking. So we'll see. We'll talk about this again with our panel session. A hot topic and a very current theme, tourism caps, ladies and gentlemen. They've become a big conversation this year, with many popular resorts and tourist attractions opting for such an approach, including Barcelona and the Canary Islands. The fear, of course, is that many popular destinations and attractions are being ruined by just having too many visitors, while the experience of those tourists who go there is somewhat, I guess, diminished by the sheer weight of the numbers. This year, Thailand has banned visitors from 4 of its islands, to protect the coral from permanent damage. Italian officials, they've announced caps on 5 villages along the Ligurian Sea. You'll get a copy of that. I think it's Ligurian Sea, something like that. I can't pronounce it. My French is not good. But the whole idea by the Italian, I should say, not French. I'm Australian. What do I know, huh? What do I know? You Euros, I tell you. The aim of the Italian officials, and this is quite an astonishing number, is their aim is to reduce visitor numbers from 2.5 million to 1.5 million. So they want to cut out 1 million visitors. The travel and tourism industry seems to back these moves. Three-quarters of senior industry professionals polled, they agree with the statement and the statement says, tourism caps are a practical solution to the problems of overcrowding. This compares with just 65% in the last year's report, the 2015 report. Of the 75% that said tourism caps were useful, 30% said they are somewhat useful, 27% said quite useful, and 18% said extremely useful. Again, something we can talk about later on. And when asked if caps would be a good move for their company or destination, 6 out of 10 agreed. 6 out of 10 said, yeah, caps would be a good move for our company or for our destination. And here's the thing, because for the 2015 report, only 36% agreed tourism caps would be good for their business. So we've gone from 36% to 60% in a year. Let's move on again. Very much in the same theme. UK holidaymakers think responsible tourism is the responsibility of the industry, with 6 out of 10 putting it at the industry door, and 25% saying it's the responsibility of the governments. Do you know the majority of travel respondents, 55%, agree that it is the industry's responsibility, with 70% believing 70% believing that travel has become more sustainable over the past 10 years. Three-quarters of UK holidaymakers say they consider the environment and sustainability when going on holiday, right? So remember that number. 3/4 say, yep, we consider the environment and we consider sustainability when we choose a holiday destination. So 3/4. 2015, it was 60%. So again, another increase. But I ask you to remember that 75% number, because here's the thing. Only 4% offset their flights. And that's exactly the same percentage as last year. So only 4% offset their flights. So I'm wondering, as a layman, is there another option than offsetting? Because it's easy to talk the talk, but it doesn't seem like that 75% are walking the walk. On that subject, I will say, I want to give a plug, big plug, because I'd like to talk about the 10th let you know about the 10th World Responsible Tourism Day. That is tomorrow. I have the pleasure and honor of chairing that opening ceremony and then also announcing the winners of the World Responsible Tourism Awards right here at the WTM. That's at the global stage, so you're all welcome. Make sure you pop along tomorrow morning for that. Alongside Brexit, we can't avoid this. Tomorrow, it can't come soon enough. Who's tired of this? Tomorrow's US election. It is going to certainly, I can only imagine, be the talk on the exhibition floor all of this week. And despite Donald Trump's experience as this hotelier, the global travel industry believes that Hillary Clinton would make a better president for the industry. 6 out of 10, there you go, 60% backed Clinton compared to only 7% for Mr. Trump. Trump's policies, well, we know a few of them. Banning Muslims from entering the United States. Again, he's kind of backpedaled. He's eased a little bit off that. Oh, the wall's still going up, though, apparently, between the United States and Mexico. It's going to be a boom business for the concrete and brick industry. But you got to, in all seriousness, you got to take it because you got to look in contrast. It is the outgoing president, Barack Obama, who was instrumental in setting up Brand USA, which launched right here at the WTM back in 2011. Big contrast indeed between those two. Something you guys, all of us, but you're in the industry, you can't avoid. You can't avoid, you've got to embrace it, I can only imagine. It's the growing trend around the world of the sharing economy, which is being seen as certainly having an impact on the travel industry. However, now, when I read this, I went, really? But the impact may not be yet as significant as perceived. The poster child, of course, of the sharing economy right there in the middle, Airbnb. However, look at that number there. Only 12% of British holidaymakers have said they've used the website. And we all know the website allows for renting homes and rooms to travelers. It's worth around $30 billion. I think it's about $33 billion. Airbnb. Little side note, just because I've covered it in my shows. That's the value that they put on Airbnb as a company. It's about 33 billion. You know, the closest company, if you will, in terms of accommodation, is the largest hotel group in the world. It's the Hilton Hotel Group. We're around 1,000. They own bricks and mortar, right? 1,000 properties. Hilton is valued at about 23 billion, just to give you an idea. Now, I say 12% of British holidaymakers say they've used Airbnb. And again, it may not sound a lot. However, here's the thing. It compares to only 3% in last year's report. So that's a big increase. 6 out of 10 of those who have used Airbnb have said that they would do so again. And 1 in 5 who haven't used Airbnb have said they're going to consider using it in the future. The traditional travel industry, I have to say, is pretty divided. It's pretty divided on the impact of the sharing economy. 47% of respondents say their businesses are unaffected. Wow, nearly half say they're not affected by the sharing economy. Of those that are seeing or were seeing an impact, 32% say it's negative. 21% say the sharing economy is positive for their business. Let's go from that to this. Again, it's been a horrid year. Terrorism. We know this year, and the threat, of course, of just the threat of terrorism has greatly had an enormous impact on travel and tourism industry. Tunisia, Egypt, Turkey, just 3 countries that have had their tourism industry dramatically impacted by terrorism. So not surprisingly, 3/4 of industry experts say terrorism has impacted their business over the past year. No surprises. Industry executives, they cite terrorism above all other situations, including strikes, industry or company scares, the refugee crisis, health crises like Zika virus. All that aside, they say terrorism is number one. 1 in 4 British holidaymakers are concerned by the threat of terrorism, including 1 in 10 who are extremely concerned. Interestingly, though, 40% are not concerned, 40% of UK holidaymakers not concerned about terrorism at all, despite, of course, a number of high-profile attacks this year. The final chapter looks at UK travel trends. The financial protection of holidays was high again on the agenda this summer following the failure of many travel companies, especially low-cost holidays. I'm sure you know about that. 100,000 customers were left out of pocket when that company collapsed. Low-cost holidays, it didn't have an air travel organiser's license, ATOL. Didn't have ATOL because it moved its bonding to Spain in 2013. The report, it found that, and this is good news, report found that only 5%, we can do better, but only 5% of holidaymakers are unaware of ATOL and ABTA logos. Of course, we know those logos, just for those who don't, highlighting that a company is financially protected and that repatriation will take place for you overseas if the companies go bust. Reassuringly, 7 out of 10 holidaymakers actively look for those logos, for the ATOL and ABTA logos when booking a holiday. So 70%, good number. Again, can do better. The Civil Aviation Authority say the number of ATOL-protected bookings rose for the 4th consecutive year. That's in 2015-2016, with 25.2 million holidaymakers protected by the ATOL scheme. And that's up from 23.8 million just the year before. In 2013, the UK government introduced fines of 60 quid, £60 per pupil, doubling to £120 if not paid within 3 weeks, for parents of state school children who take them out of school for anything other than exceptional circumstances. For the academic year of 2014 to 2015, this generated a massive £3 million with taking children on holiday, and that was one of the key reasons, of course, for the fine. But you may, most of you, many of you, all of you may remember that legal case that was brought by one parent to the High Court, and the High Court ruling that parents could take children out of school to go on holiday if that child had a good attendance record. And this has led to the majority of parents, 56%, being prepared to take their children on holiday during term time. This next one I also find very fascinating given the current times that we live in. It looks like the humble holiday brochure maybe having a comeback. Of course, with the rise of what I'm talking about, our age that we live in, the rise of the internet, one would think that the holiday brochure was perhaps a thing of the past. However, a third of holidaymakers, 34% you can see there, have used a brochure in the last year to book a holiday. That figure is more than double the 14% who said they used a brochure last year to book a holiday. While in 2014, it was only 6%. 6%, 14%, 34%. Really? They're using a brochure? Wow. And finally, who would you like to sit next to on a plane? Returning to the theme, of course, of US elections, our own UK politicians are more popular than the US presidential candidates. Colourful character, look at him, there he is, Boris Johnson. Most popular, 23%. Want to sit next to him on a plane. PM, Theresa May, she received what, a fifth of the votes. Hillary Clinton polled 17. Nigel Farage, returning UKIP leader, 13%. Look at old Trumpy, though. I'm sure he's hoping to register more votes. The only thing I can think here is that 97% of the people don't want to be groped on a plane. That's all I'm saying. Apparently, allegedly. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the presentation of the World Travel Market Industry 2016 Industry Report. I know you're going to get copies. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found a lot of that information very, very useful. I'm going to ask you now to stay with us because we're going to have a Q&A session. We've got 4 friends from the industry, 4 experts. Can I ask our panelists to come up? You know where you're sitting. Come up and I'll introduce you very shortly. We don't have a lot of time, ladies and gentlemen. We have about 30 minutes or so, but about 30 minutes. And I implore you, I've got some questions. Where do you think you're going? You've come for breakfast, you've eaten the food, and now you're taking off. Get the tasers ready out there. I implore you to take part if you've got questions. I have a microphone, and we've got another microphone. If there's something you want, just raise your arm and fire away. I'll come over to you and we'll get started. Let me introduce our panelists. I'm going to come down here. Let's start over here. Caroline Bremer. Hello, Caroline, Head of Travel and Tourism Research at Euromonitor International. Next to Caroline, we've got John Strickland, a familiar face to me. I talk to John a lot on my programs about aviation. He's worked in the aviation industry for more than 30 years at airlines including British Airways, British Caledonia, Buzz, and now he runs JLS Consulting. Over here, Harold. Good morning, Harold. Harold Goodwin, Professor of Responsible Tourism, Manchester Metropolitan University. He is also WTM's London World Responsible Tourism Advisor. And next to Harold is Doug. Hi, Doug. Doug Lansky is a travel expert who works with tourist boards on their marketing and basically their visitor experience practices as well as promotional practices. Ladies first, can we? Caroline, can I start with this? We were talking about the chic countries, right? China, India, Iceland, and Cuba, up-and-coming destinations. I'm just curious, does that match your research?
Definitely. I think when you look at the sheiks, you've got the likes of China and India, who are, the world's fastest-growing economies, and they also belong to the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, and India, China. So that was last decade. So these economies are very strong, and of course, once consumers reach a certain income, over $15,000, they have more funds to travel internationally. So on the outbound side, those markets are very interesting. You can also see recently the UK government has more than doubled the number of flights that can operate between the UK and China, and that's from any point in those countries. So those kind of initiatives are really going to stimulate that demand, particularly from China outbound to the UK. And then on the destination front, Cuba, as you mentioned, with the warming, the normalizing of the relations, opening up, Barack Obama going to visit Cuba, taking a trade envoy, global hotel chains moving in, Airbnb setting up. So Cuba, as you say, is very much on the verge of huge development. And then you also have Iceland. Iceland's a fantastic destination, great example of sustainability.
Where do those numbers come from? I mean, again, I've got nothing against Iceland. It's wonderful, beautiful people.
Well, the thing is about Iceland is that it was actually very strong before the global crisis, but then it went through this sort of political economic shock. It withdrew a little, and then demand has now rebounded. So it's pre-crisis levels now. It's very strong in terms of growth. It's got low-cost carriers doing the long-haul routes over to North America.
Wow,
so Iceland's the only problem with Iceland is it's got too much interest, too much tourism demand, and so it's how to balance that.
So it's got to look sustainable tourism.
It's that balance.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Oh.
I was just there. I was working a bit with Iceland, and part of the problem there is it's gotten so popular, and all these countries we're mentioning are popular because they're authentic. They're perceived to be authentic and not overcrowded and highly mature destinations yet. They're exciting and new, the new kid on the block. In the case of Iceland, like Iceland Air is looking to bring 10,000 people a day. The hotels can hold about 6,000. They've got Airbnb starting to get some lift there. But one of the biggest problems is what people are going to do when they get there. Reykjavik's a nice town, but it's not like walking around London or Paris. It's not the big draw. It's the nature and the things that you do when you're there. And one of the biggest things to do there is Blue Lagoon. About 80-85% insist they feel they have to do the Blue Lagoon when they get to Iceland. That holds about 2,500 people a day. And if 85% of visitors want to do that, you're getting a lot of people showing up who can't get in, who would love to go in. And in fact, they say that at the Blue Lagoon, people show up every day in tears because they can't get in. So
Pre-book, maybe. You're going to have to start booking
well,
for
exactly.
the Blue Lagoon.
And so once you start
Aaron,
pre-booking,
can I just-
that'll affect it.
Let me just jump in as well, because we've all got an Icelandic interest. I've got to confess, I work with the Icelandic Airport Authority at Savia, who run Keflavik Airport. So what Caroline was saying, what Doug was saying, resonates. But Iceland has had a traditional peak tourism season, end of June to the end of August. It is very busy then. Reykjavik is probably close to maxed out, apart from Airbnb bringing the extra capacity. But as Doug said, it's an amazing island, and I think what needs to happen here on in is a building of awareness. It's not just Reykjavik. Reykjavik's a beautiful place, but the island up in the north, over in the east, even the peninsula near Reykjavik's Keflavik Airport offers a lot. So it's getting people out of a town, using the nature in a more positive way, in a more wide way than just the entry point city, because the air services have brought people. And there is a bit of a pressure cooker in those 2 months, but that still leaves 10 months.
Okay, Harold, come in on this, because
Yeah, sure. I was just in Iceland a week ago.
You've all been in Iceland recently.
What is very striking, and you'll see it when you get your copy of the report, is the Director General of Tourism is concerned about over-tourism in Iceland, and he's very concerned about how Iceland can absorb as many visitors as you want to go without destroying the experience the visitors go for. And I must say, there's every sign that Iceland is beginning to struggle with the numbers. And it's easy to talk about distributing those tourists across the island, but they're not sure that they can handle that or that they want to. And it'll be very interesting to see how Iceland responds to its success. The success is based on the airline.
Right.
The airline's making good money out of the North Atlantic route. So if numbers to America were to drop for any reason, Iceland may find that its numbers reduce slowly anyway.
But okay, if those numbers don't reduce, I'm going to nicely segue into this while I've got you and talk about caps, right? I mean,
Yep.
A hot theme for you. But would Iceland be a good example then of putting in caps?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to talk about caps. They're much more difficult to do. I mean, I've worked a lot around national parks, and they very often want to cap the numbers. And when you talk about carrying capacity, people are always capping that number at about 5 years' growth on the grounds that they won't still be managing it in 5 years' time. So that's an easy thing to do, but it's not. It's an easy thing to say. It's an easy thing to agree with. It's extraordinarily difficult for a destination to do it. And, of course, the tour operators will be happy about it. If you look at Barcelona, they've capped the number of hotels. There's been a block on the building of new hotels. What's happened? The rates in the hotels have gone up. Airbnb has grown to take that demand. But in the end, prices go up, and that isn't favourable to consumers. So balancing it's a very difficult thing.
But just in a nutshell, Doug, I was going to bring you
Yeah, I would say we already have tourism caps everywhere, and that's essentially determined by the airline seats, and it's determined by hotel capacity or Airbnb capacity, as the case may be. But when that capacity is at its peak, it's typically an awful visitor experience in the city at the popular attractions already. So what they need to do is sort of back it up and go, okay, what should the carrying capacity be for everyone to have a good experience even in peak season? What's that level where they're not waiting in queues all day, where it feels nice, where they're not walking down the high street like this, like penguins, Times Square at New Year's, and figure out that number first and then work backwards and figure out how many they can hold. And a good way to do this with the free market is to take these top attractions, have time ticketing so they're getting the max flow without waiting all the way through, make that kind of booking available when people are booking their flights, show availability, and the free market and transparency will help set those caps. So even though there might be airlines available at that time while they're looking at their flights, they'll go, oh, I can't get into the Anne Frank Museum then. I'll go a few days later, or I'll go next week. And that'll help spread out tourism. Yeah. That's the missing mechanism that we
Aaron,
badly need.
I think there's a point worth adding here. In Iceland, there's been a lot of work done by the airport, the airlines, and the tourism authorities to develop tourism in the winter. Now, if somebody hasn't been to Iceland in the winter, they may assume it's dark and it's cold. Well, it's dark for a short period of time, much shorter than, say, here in London. It's not even particularly cold. But the Aurora Borealis, the spas and so on, we've seen a lot of airlines adding seats in the winter. The strongest growth is now coming outside of a peak, which I think is a positive thing.
Right. Can I just go back before I move on to aviation? Duke, I know, Harold, you said, talking about caps, very difficult. But when they're in place, do they work? Just in a nutshell, do caps work?
It depends what you're trying to cap the number of visitors at. I mean, if you take, in London, we have a lot of caps on visits to the exhibitions. what that means is a lot of people don't go to exhibitions anymore because they can't find a ticket, and even when they do go, it's too full. So the resentment which will build up, and Iceland is worried about that, and it's certainly the issue in Barcelona, the resentment that builds up with the local community that can no longer access a resource which they've taken for granted for years, and which suddenly, if you look at Benito, which is a place which had a cap from the very beginning on the number of people who could go into the pristine chalk cast limestone areas, they've had a real problem with the community being offended by the fact they no longer have access because it's capped by price. And obviously capping by price, which is effectively what happens, is rationing by price. That means that your market shape changes considerably.
Okay. Let me just quickly move on, because as I said, we don't have a lot of time. Let me move on to aviation. Caroline, is there a need, do you think, or is there a need from your customers, the travellers out there, for supersonic?
Oh, for the supersonic jet. Well, what's interesting about if you like, the Phoenix Rising, we had Concorde that was sort of taken out of service in 2003, and now new investment in supersonic models, whether that's Virgin working with a new startup called Boom, or NASA, we've got Ariane in the AS2. So they're sort of leveraging new materials, so using sort of composite materials rather than aluminium, and so saving in terms of materials, saving in terms of using renewables, new sort of fuel efficiency. So there is, I think it's an interesting development. It's one that's being worked on. There will be testing. I'm sure John knows a lot more about this.
I think John's a little bit more sceptical, aren't you? I mean, supersonic flying by 2020, come on. No.
I would be very sceptical of that actually happening. I think maybe one or two well-heeled people in a few projects, maybe the likes of Sir Richard Branson, may get to do it. Technologically, it's not the issue. Technology can deliver this, but the challenge we had with Concorde was quite a small plane, expensive in terms of its ticket prices, and only a few very wealthy people could afford to use it. And it only really worked on one or two routes, London, New York, and Paris, New York. Other routes on a few occasional luxury flights here and there worked, but not for mass travel. Now, airlines today are watching their profit margins, if they are profitable at all, and the manufacturers are pouring money into big investments on these new, smaller composite aircraft which offer long range, like the Boeing Dreamliner, or big aircraft like Airbus's double-decker A380. So I think this is going to be a long way off, to be honest.
Yeah. Doug, do you have anything to say on...
I think the only thing was that I wanted to add is not so much on that, which is a little bit more you're talking about people who are offsetting their flights. Something that I'd love to see, when you go on a booking engine, you're going to choose a flight here, it'll often it tells you almost every time what kind of airplane is being flown. It's a 737 or what. And I know they're not all equal in terms of gasoline consumption. So it would be great to see some kind of a marking. If I could choose between two flights that are relatively the same price and see that this one has a better rating, and I'm sort of offsetting my flight
because it's
in a
more
way.
fuel efficient, etc.
Yeah, it's more fuel efficient. So by just choosing this flight there, I can just vote with my wallet. That puts pressure on the industry to purchase more of those kinds of planes. And
would that work, John? Would that work?
I think it's certainly good to make people more aware about the ability to offset flights. I'm not so sure it would work by aircraft type. The industry is investing massively in new aircraft. The leading airlines have the latest generation aircraft which are burning less fuel, producing less emissions. But the challenge in this statistically is it's how you measure it. Is it how full the planes are, where they're flying, or what kind of planes? But certainly the industry itself is trying to do as much as it can.
But if there's a bigger push for better airplanes by the consumer, isn't that going to be a step in the right direction?
I mean, just today we had financial figures out from Ryanair. Some people despise Ryanair, but it's got the newest aircraft out, Boeing 737-800s. They fly them very full, and they actually make profits out of it. So actually it's a virtuous circle. Full planes, new planes, lower cost for customers.
So, I was just going to say, what we've also seen is this interesting trend of airlines adopting the sharing economy. So the charter private jets sort of adapting that kind of business model through apps such as Jet Smarter and Jet Player, FlexJet, all these people, so that actually people like us, can enjoy that sort of private jet experience, but for a much cheaper price.
It's cheaper, but it's still expensive, isn't it?
If you get 12 people all together, we could all go somewhere
nice.
Hands
up, who flies on a private jet here? Hands up, who flies on a private jet? There you go. No, I understand what you're saying. Though. No, yes, you're right.
And actually, one of them was giving away. Was it Fly Victor was giving away free flights? So basically, you know, they're introducing it to us.
I just came back from an IATA event in Dubai, and one of the topics was raised. And I'm like, wait till Uber. Uber. There's about.
Well, I think they're doing helicopters.
Well, they're doing helicopters,
Yeah.
but in the United States alone, there's around 10,000 private aircraft sitting around the United States. Wait till somebody, one of these outside disruptors, gets the idea of pooling those that are not being used or people who want to list. I don't know. That could certainly shake up the industry.
Aaron, I wanted just to add to this. I mean,
yes.
There was at least one effort to put up a website that enabled you to choose the most carbon efficient price. It showed both, but it failed. No, it didn't fail only because of that. It failed for other reasons as well. But it has been tried. But nearly everybody knows if they fly direct, fly on a charter or fly on a budget airline, that will be much more carbon efficient. And that raises a lot of questions about why hub airports are still flavour of the month in the UK, because actually people want to fly direct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One second, I don't think that's a fair comparison to say that idea failed, because you want to see it when you're on an OTA. When you're choosing between flights, you want to make a quick call. I got 2 tickets. I got to book it in 2 minutes. I don't want to.
It was on an OTA and it failed.
The whole idea
it didn't fail only for that reason. And the fact that it failed doesn't mean it's not worth trying again, but it has been tried.
How do they judge that it fails if they don't know how people are looking at that?
No, it failed because the thing went bust. It didn't manage to survive.
The whole OTA did?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's... Oh.
Well, somewhat on the same theme. Can I ask you, Harold, while I've got you, I was really fascinated, surprised perhaps, by the finding of the 4%.
Oh, I'm very pleased with that.
Okay, explain why. Because so it's the same percentage.
Because offsetting doesn't actually reduce your carbon emissions at all. And I think consumers are very savvy about that. They're not convinced by the argument.
Right. So is there an alternative? What's the alternative?
Yeah, fly less or use the budget.
That's not going to happen though, because the numbers are increasing.
But people are increasingly flying direct. A lot of the growth has been in the budget airlines. They fly direct.
I think people
fly full. Don't fly first class.
People do want to fly direct. The challenge is not all routes will support a direct service year round, or not even on a seasonal basis. And you find a lot of new flights coming out of hub airports, but supported by connecting passengers. The airlines need both. It is just worth mentioning on the environmental issue that the airline industry globally has just signed up through the UN agency ICAO, amazingly, a global agreement on emissions to reduce aviation emissions by 2050. Now that is some progress. We're not there yet by any means, but at least it's a positive step.
But correct me if I'm wrong. The aviation, commercial airline industry, or aviation in general, has made more advancements than any other industry in the transport sector.
I think
in terms of
probably
efficiency.
The reality, and it hasn't really shouted about what it's done over the years.
No, it doesn't sing its praises very well, does
and
it?
Sadly, if we eliminated the whole of aviation, which of course would bring the world to a standstill, we'd still have a massive emissions problem.
Okay. Before we leave aviation, anything else? Anybody got any questions in the audience? You are. There's a lot of journalists in here, right? You are journalists, aren't you?
Gentleman just next to you.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris Maffidon. A lot of people said some things about. A lot of people said some things about June the 23rd, and how the fall in the pound was going to cause a real boost in the UK travel industry. Why hasn't that been borne out?
Well, I mean, I don't think we've seen the data yet, but certainly anecdotally from Cornwall, they've had one of their best years ever, and it's not because they've had great weather. A lot of people have stayed home.
We've got a tourism forecast model, and also I've checked the latest figures from the ONS. So in October, they were reporting on the latest year figures for August, and August was a record year for UK inbound. So already we have 36.8 million visitors spending record amounts. What we're seeing is a short-term boost from the depreciation of the pound. We have the majority of our inbound source markets are from Europe, France, Germany, Spain, Ireland. Then we also have the North Americans. So the euro and the dollar are really strong at the moment, and the pound is weak. So, consumers are savvy. They're taking advantage of that. Whether it lasts, that's another question. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with Brexit, and there are high levels of uncertainty.
Can I just add, actually, too, I've done stories on this since June. Luxury goods has certainly increased. Watches, handbags have gone, certainly in London, have seen double-digit growth in terms of sales because the tourists are coming in and they're 10, 15% cheaper. So they're buying luxury goods. So I think there has been a little bit of a boon, if you will, for inbound visitors and the spend. While we're on Brexit, since the gentleman mentioned Brexit, Doug, talk to what impact do you think Brexit has had on the UK tourism destination? And do you think these certain companies would have to, I don't know, amend their strategies?
That's not really in my wheelhouse, strength. I always sort of defer to the data crunching, and if we see some great data that comes out of this, what I have, like everyone in this room has, is sort of a gut reaction to how the drop of the value of the pound is going to attract more visitors to the UK because they sense bargains and reacting so forth. But until we see the actual great data coming out of this, I don't know it's going to be easy to call. I'd like sort of send that question down the panel.
We have a challenge again with airlines. So depending on where airlines are based, the UK airlines saw an immediate increase in costs. Fuel costs, aircraft leasing costs are dollar denominated.
Yep.
That's a challenge for the likes of EasyJet or IAG, the parent group of BA. On the other hand, an airline like Ryanair, which is a euro-based airline out of Dublin, it can sell more customers into the UK in euros. It might actually want to sell less customers in pounds because by the time they convert that into euros, which goes into their bank account, they've earned less. But we might see a trend upwards in US or euro-denominated tourism into the UK next year if we keep the exchange rates we've got now.
Harold.
Presumably, John, many airlines will start to relocate. I mean, EasyJet have been talking about relocating into
Well, certainly
Europe.
licensing, where their licenses are held is a big future problem potentially in the making, because if the UK is out of the EU, a lot of the regulatory framework, air service agreements, which we operate by now, could be just thrown in the bin. We may have to start again.
Well, you and I have spoken on my show, right? When we talked about,
absolutely.
I mean, if anybody's going to get hit pretty hard, if and when Brexit does happen, it is EasyJet. I mean, they're going to either have to buy a small European airline so they can get the license.
They'd have to get a license somewhere else to protect some of their traffic rights. I mean, EasyJet, for example, flies within France or within Spain. They wouldn't necessarily be allowed to do that as a British airline. They would have to get an additional license to continue doing that. Similarly, Ryanair couldn't continue to fly within the UK.
But even looking long haul, and you know better than I do, the agreement, with the United States, right, the transatlantic.
Yeah,
so
I mean, we have a
with
European Union agreement with the US for air services. The UK used to have its own bilateral. Theoretically, we might have to go back to that, or the UK, in a real sort of a doomsday scenario, would have no air service agreement with the US, and flights would have to stop. Now, I can't see that happening.
No.
But that's as bad as a scenario as it could be.
Any questions on aviation before we move on? No. Okay. Harold, can we go back? We talked about the caps. I want to go back to responsible tourism and the findings from the report. You've been doing, of course, the report on it. I mean, how confident are you in the sense that responsible and sustainable tourism is actually being taken seriously, if you will, around the world by the industry?
Well, I mean, that's a question of how full the glass is, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
on the one hand, you've got companies like TUI, which are taking it very seriously. They're global leaders. Got a number of destinations now taking it very seriously. You'll see in the awards tomorrow, if you come, that there are a lot of companies doing amazing things. Are we doing enough to overcome the problems? No, we're not. Are some people making progress? Yes, we are. But we're not making progress fast enough to even cover the growth in the industry. That's the real problem.
Right, so we've got to catch up with the growth. Caroline, I mean, what do you see in findings? I mean, are holiday makers, do they take it seriously? I know I sort of said like 75% of UK holiday makers looked for, they consider environment and sustainability when they book a holiday, but
I think there's a difference between how people perceive themselves as a traveller, and we see that in the numbers. So they, identify with sustainability and the need to reduce your carbon footprint, but actually in terms of practice, it's a much lower percentage, as we saw there with the. But then it's about giving them different alternatives. It's also. There's always this question, who's ultimately responsible for sustainability? Is it the industry? Is it the government? Is it the consumer? And I think this is a challenge for many destinations as they wonder, should I be promoting sustainability when actually it should be fundamental to the whole of the tourism offer? And if you think that next year is going to be the UN WTO's Year of Sustainable Development, this is now the norm. It should be the norm, but we're, as Harold says, far from being where we need to be.
Yeah.
But if you look at what happened in the food industry, a lot of the pressure came from the media and from campaigning groups. But we do know, because it's very clear in the success of different brands, that if you don't take any notice at all of the responsible elements, you see it happening in clothing, we've seen it happening in food, then consumers ultimately will switch across. And there is an expectation, and Jane Ashton nailed that in 2008. She is now the group sustainability person for TUI internationally, and she said, we know that our consumers expect us to do this. They expect us to make it part of the way we construct the holiday. The problem is that people haven't expected of the airlines, and I don't accept that the airlines have done very much, actually. I think they've been real laggards in this. If you compare them with the number of fuel-efficient and hybrid cars that are on the market, it's very different in the airlines. And I know, John, that the production timescales are longer, but really, 2050, that's a very academic target.
No, but I disagree, Howard, in the sense that aircraft are already in service with much more fuel-efficient engines. And again, on the one hand, we as consumers want, at the end of the food chain, the lowest price to travel. Airlines are trying to deliver that and invest in this new technology. They've done it. They've got to do more. So I agree with what you say, but more has to be done. But we've got to have affordable travel to fit into the whole tourism arena.
I was just going to say there's an interesting example, in the States where they're developing, the driverless cars and the hybrid cars, and basically they'll run between. General Motors is going to compete with the American Airlines on the LA San Francisco route, I believe, and so that's what you have to see. You have to see not your traditional competitors, but Eurostar competing with EasyJet, or you've got to start. It should be an open playing field. So.
Sure.
I think you need a mix. Like Obama was saying the other day, one of the most important titles, maybe the most important title, is the role of citizen. And in the same way, the consumer has that title, that if we're demanding stuff, these companies are largely going to provide it. But we do need companies that can show the way, provide that kind of leadership, and we need media that's willing to cover it. We need special interest groups willing to push it forward. Okay. So it's like a team effort. Hopefully we'll get there. And we are getting there. It's just not going as quickly as I think a lot of us would like to see.
Hey, while the American is speaking, what is going on? What have you guys been? I know you haven't lived there for 25 years, but still no excuse. You're an American. What is going on?
I voted already a couple months ago. They make it real easy to vote when you're abroad. I can't understand when you see these people standing in these long queues. It just boggles the mind how easy it was to me to vote from Sweden and how hard it is for them to vote in the U.S. But I hope the orange Muppet does not win.
What impact? What impact do you think? We've got.
I think if the orange Muppet wins, it's going to be huge. It's going to have bigger than Brexit shockwaves through the industry. People not wanting to go to the U.S. to support of people from. I guess it'll be great travel out of the U.S.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't remember the number, but there was quite a few percentage who said they want to they'll leave. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be put more pressure on the immigration than it will on.
Okay. Anybody got any questions? Because I got one more topic that I want to bring up before we wrap it up. I want to talk about the digital revolution. I want to talk about the disruptors. I mentioned Airbnb, etc. Okay, I'll tell you something. I did a story 7-8 weeks ago. It was a Dell global survey, and it really sort of stood out to me. 16,000 corporations around the world. They interviewed and polled CEOs of these companies. Nearly 50% of those CEOs said they do not know what their industry is going to look like in just 3 years. I was astounded. In just 3 years, and they're supposed to be the big boss running that ship, they had no idea what their industry is going to look like. And it's from this digital revolution that is sweeping the world. Harold.
Can I give a travel industry example of that? We had a conference in Barcelona in 2013. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and they'll be here talking this afternoon about disintermediation as an issue. It's a big issue in Barcelona. It's a big issue in many countries. The extraordinary thing was, in 2013, that's only 3 years ago, the issue did not come up. Yeah. It was on nobody's minds. Yeah. So anybody who thinks they can tell you what's going to happen 3 years from now, or let alone by 2050, is kidding you. Nobody knows.
Doug, is the industry embracing this revolution that we're going through at the moment?
The shared economy revolution.
Shared
That's what we're
economy,
talking
the
about.
digital, the shared economy.
Yeah, I think that we could do a better job with it. I think there needs to be some form of regulation. I think everyone was in agreement that medicine was a good thing when that arrived on the scene, but then we created in the US the FDA to have some kind of control and oversight. I feel like what's missing here and what people are trying to, governments are scrambling to kind of cope with is the rise of Airbnb and Uber, and how do you deal this with the taxi drivers, and how do you deal with private residencies that don't want this, or parts of neighborhoods that don't want it. And if you have, like, for example, if you look at some of the biggest new developments around the world that are mixed-use developments, it'll say 50% residential, 20% retail, this much commercial. What they don't have in that equation when they're building it right now from the ground up is how much of that residential is zoned to be short-term rental. That's something that needs to be on the discussion table in terms of how are we going to factor this into the equation moving forward, so it becomes part of it from the very beginning. And I think if we do that, we can form more intelligent, smarter cities and better neighborhoods if we start discussing that earlier in the process.
That's what Barcelona will be talking about this afternoon on the panel.
Right.
Because they're trying to retrofit it into the 3 parts of Barcelona which are excessively over-visited from the point of view, not of the industry, but of local residents. And certainly we're going to see more and more political action by local residents demanding that the city authorities protect the character of their neighbourhoods and that they don't become tourism ghettos.
Caroline, do you have, just briefly before we wrap it up, anything to add to
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's about urban development and making sure that the residents are part of the discussions when it comes to making decisions about infrastructure, managing future tourism demand, and making sure that everybody's around the table. But ultimately, it's about technology. And we can see that with the rise of mobile, that's really going to boost in-destination spending and, this idea of mapping demand and supply. With big data, you have that opportunity. So I think technology can also be used to manage supply and demand in a much better way.
Just briefly, do you think your industry underestimates the disruptors?
I don't think so. I think this industry rolls with the punches. And, we've got some great examples of Expedia. We know that the global players, Google, Facebook, are all potentially moving in into travel. They work with all the travel players already. But I think technology has to be leveraged by everybody, whether you're a small independent or a global chain, and just keep, ahead of the curve.
Okay, and John, I'll leave it to you last, because as I said, I came back from that IATA World Passenger Symposium. The week after that, I was in Singapore at the Air Passenger Experience Expo, and this was just the big theme on all the panels.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
But the airline, where is the airline disruptor? Everybody says it's coming. It's just a matter of who and when.
Maybe it's Ryanair who's already there, because they're getting very big into this already. But we're going to have 2 industry leaders this afternoon, the leaders of Emirates and IAG. They are just getting so many bright young techno-type people into their organisations to see where this leads. And as Harold said, we don't know where we're going in 3 years' time, never mind 50. But airlines realise already the automation, the data mining, the customisation of itineraries, the add-ons to the seat, all of this is happening. It's got to be invested in. Even if the leaders themselves don't understand it, they've got to get the people who do for the next generation.
Okay.
Doug, can I just make one final comment on that?
Yep.
'Cause one of the problems, it seems to me, is that we do know what the future of the airline industry will be, in the sense that those aircraft coming into service now will be around for 30 years. People who are building hotels which are not environmentally friendly, we know that they will be around in 30 and 50 years. So that bit we can predict, I think, because we know it's going to be there. It's a long tail. What we can't predict is what's going to happen with the market. And with the elections in the States and what happened here in June, all bets are off, I think, for the medium-term future. There are going to be major changes economically as a result of this.
Okay. That's it. No questions. Please give a round of applause to Caroline, John, Doug. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Wraps it up. Thank you for coming. Thanks for staying, by the way. I hope you have a very successful WTM. And see you tomorrow in the global stage at the World Tourism Session and the World Tourism Awards. Thank you.